Hello everybody, this is Mithril Zenith, and today I wanted to talk not about a weapon, but about a class. Today we're talking about the Great Knight. I find the Great Knight to be a very interesting class, and I wanted to talk about why it exists, why, a lot of times it ends up just being a worse paladin, a nerfed version of the paladin, and why I think that's okay. Also why most Jagens in the series seem to have started becoming Great Knights instead of paladins as well. So, if you think that's interesting, like the video, hit the subscribe button to sub to the channel for more weapon, class, and whatever Fire Emblem discussions, and let's get into it. So, the Great Knight is a class that, in name, technically existed in Genealogy and Thracia, and you're going to see Radiant Dawn here. That's just because Great Knight was the internal term for, like, Axe Knight, Axe Paladin, effectively. Promoted version of an Axe Knight in those games. The real base version of the Great Knight that I want to talk about came about from the Sacred Stones, though. These are its base stats, these are its caps. Sword, lance, and axe access, triple weapon access. As you can see that, actually maybe you can't see because it's a little bit off screen. Yeah. Sword, lance, and axe access. Could be A rank in all of them in Sacred Stones. Nerf down to A, sorry, S rank in Sacred Stones. Nerf down to A in Awakening. Nerf down to BAB in Fates. Great Knight also had some class-specific growth rates. Those mostly use only really in 3 houses. So why is this class such a good idea, such a good class? Well, the Great Knight is a... trying to think the best way to describe it. The Great Knight is a nerfed version of the Paladin and a buffed version of the General, kind of. It kind of gets both the best and the worst of both worlds. It is an armored, mounted unit. It has full access to the melee weapon triangle, swords, lances, and axes. It has pretty solid stats across the board, mostly in strength and defense. Though not really too bad in other ways. It's a little bit low on speed and skill, but it can be a stat powerhouse. The one thing, okay, max movement 15, its base movement is 6. Let's be real here. It has the base movement, at least in Sacred Stones, of a promoted infantry unit. They do bring this up in Awakening Fates and 3 Houses to a base of 7. But in those games, I believe Paladin has a base of 8 or 9. Let me take a look. Yes, Paladin in Awakening Fates, 3 Houses, base 8 movement. But it's still above the General's base of 6 in those games, or 5 in Sacred Stones. Something interesting to note about General is that in previous games, GBA games particularly, Binding Blade and Blazing Blade, General only had lance and axe access, and it was the Paladin that had full weapon triangle access. This was changed and flipped in Sacred Stone, so Paladin had lance and sword, General and Great Knight had full weapon triangle access. So, if you do a direct comparison, you see Great Knight has lower stat caps than General in pretty much everything except for speed, and then luck, which is hard capped. This does include resistance, where it's the same resistance, same speed. General has 2 more skill and 1 more strength and 1 more defense in terms of caps. And then we're probably going to see something similar in, like, yeah, Awakening. Generals have a lot more. Wow, Generals have 35. Okay, yeah. Oh, sorry. Awakening. I was looking at Fates. Yeah, 35, 37. So Great Knights start getting a little bit more speed. They also start getting some different skills. In Awakening and beyond, Great Knights start getting access to different skills. The Luna skill gets moved to Great Knight from Armor Knight and Halberdier. Dual Guard Plus, Armored Blow and Fates, Lance Fair, Axe Fair, and Defiant Defense in 3 Houses. Meanwhile, General gets Rally Defense and Pavice and Wary Fighter, and then Paladin gets the more support focus skills, Aegis, Defender, Soul from Path of Radiance. And then just gets like Lance Fair and Terrain Resistance because it's a not a master class. So, why is Great Knight important? Why is Great Knight interesting? Why is Great Knight a good class for Fire Emblem to have? For instance, we see in the upcoming Fire Emblem Engage, it looks like Vander is a Great Knight. Vander also appears to be the Jagen. This is following a trend started by Frederick, who was a Great Knight, who was your Jagen in Awakening, followed kind of by Gunter, who was a Great Knight in Fates, as well as Jacob, I believe, could reclass into Great Knight, but I'm not sure if he could reclass into Paladin. So Great Knight, being your Jagen type, kind of makes sense, actually, when you think about it. If you watch videos like Professor Bopper's how Fire Emblem balances its Jagens, you'll know that Fire Emblem has drifted towards having all units have high growths, for the most part, not all the time. And so a unit that comes in with high bases, but then also has high growths, tends to just dominate the game, whereas a unit that comes in with high bases but has low growths tends to be still solid, still good, but viewed really negatively by the community as being a trap, as being a waste of experience, as being problematic. And so, for Jagens in particular, they need a way to balance them out, because even though people hated the low-growth, high-bases Jagens, at least everyday players of Fire Emblem hate them, people who run the game a lot, people who played games a lot, people have a lot of Fire Emblem experience, still see them as some of the best units in the game, even though they do, quote-unquote, fall off. And so, how does Fire Emblem introduce Jagens, make them powerful, make them worth using, but also give them something to worry about in the early game? Well, we see this with Frederick in Fire Emblem Awakening, particularly in Lunatic, where they capitalize on the Great Knight's armor weakness. They don't necessarily capitalize on the cavalry weakness, because you have a couple of other cavaliers at the time, but they give weapons, they give hammers to some of the Risen you fight, especially in chapter 3, I want to say? 2, 3, or 4? One of those, it's like 2 or 3. The one where you get Sully and Virion. They give one of those Risen a hammer, and he has a chance of one-shotting Frederick. Like, that's just is. So it forces you to be careful with how you use Frederick. By giving you a Great Knight instead of a Paladin, Great Knights have limited movement. They can't blaze farther ahead than your Cavaliers, for instance. They won't get too far ahead of your foot units. They can't necessarily just charge ahead. They're not the fastest option to do something. They are equally as fast as your other high movement units. They just happen to have higher stats in the early game. I think that's a little bit better way to balance it. Giving them that double weakness to both armored and mounted type weapons is an effective way of nerfing them, so long as those weapons actually show up in the hands of the enemy. Like I said, in Awakening, it happens. In other games, like Fates and whatnot, it doesn't really happen. Not that often. What else? Well, giving them skills, giving them better skills, or more desirable skills, maybe, helps them stand out from Paladin, helps them become a more desirable trait, is often used in balance in, for instance, Awakening and Fates, where if you want the offensive skill Luna, you're going to need to level at least a little bit in Great Knight, whereas if you just level in Paladin, you're getting Defender, which is a great, at least in like Fates, you're getting Defender, which is a great skill, but is more of like a support focus, +1 to all stats when you're a partner skill. It's not that offensive powerhouse skill that the Great Knight gets. And so we see another division there, whereas the Great Knight is starting to be built more to be a standalone, soloable fighter, at least in theory, whereas the Paladin is meant to be, okay, more supportive, more quickly moving around the battlefield, helping people out, carrying units, pairing up with them, doing the things you need a high movement unit to do, but not necessarily being the battlefield dominating force. At least in theory, at least in design-wise. In actuality, I still think that Paladins are probably stronger overall. The slight stat differences don't really matter too much. The skills that are given don't really make that big of a difference. I think the biggest difference skill given for this kind of trio of units, Armor Knights, Mounted units, and then Great Knight coming together, is General getting Wary Fighter in Fates. That's the biggest difference maker of a skill. But yeah, I think Great Knights are fine. I think Great Knights are a great idea to nerf Jagens, and I think we just need to see the game taking more advantage of how to target Great Knights more specifically, while still making your Great Knight Jagen strong. I hope that we see some of this in Engage, where, hey, Vander's a really good unit, but the early game at least is going to put in some enemies that threaten Vander specifically to encourage you to use other units and not just solo the game with him and maybe your main lord. That's what I hope to see. We'll see if that ends up actually happening. But what are your thoughts on Great Knights? What are your thoughts on, are they a more balanced version of Paladins? Are they a more balanced version of Generals? Are they something else entirely? Are they good? Are they bad? What are your thoughts? What have been your experiences? Let me know in the comments down below. Again, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed this type of discussion. Let me know what other classes, weapons, or other Fire Emblem topics you would like to see me talk about. And until next time, this is Mithril Zenith signing out.